The crash of that Air India plane bound for London seconds after it took off from the Indian city of Ahmedabad.
To India now, and authorities say they've now recovered 270 bodies from the site of the plane crash in Ahmedabad city on Thursday.
The Air India Flight 171 crash stands as one of the most devastating aviation disasters in modern history, marked not only by the immense loss of life, but also by the extraordinary breadth of its investigation, the intricate layers of its aftermath, and the far-reaching consequences it generated across the global aviation community. The flight, operated by a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, was intended to be a routine journey from Ahmedabad's Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport to London Heathrow on June 12, 2025. However, within seconds of liftoff, the aircraft struggled to gain altitude, emitting a Mayday distress call as it battled to ascend beyond a mere 625 feet. The plane ultimately plunged into a densely populated area, colliding with the courtyard of a nearby medical college hostel, resulting in a fiery explosion that claimed the lives of nearly all passengers and a significant number of people on the ground, including medical students who were in the midst of their evening meal. The tragedy, claiming 241 lives from within the aircraft and an additional 19 fatalities on the ground, sent shockwaves through India and the world at large. Emergency response teams, composed of local firefighters, military personnel, and medical responders, descended on the crash site almost immediately, confronting towering flames and thick plumes of smoke. They fought through hazardous conditions to rescue survivors, only to discover that there was but one lone individual who had managed to survive both the initial impact and the ensuing inferno. Vishwas Kumar Romesh, seated in seat 11A, emerged as the sole survivor, though his injuries were extensive and life-threatening, requiring urgent airlift to a specialist burns unit where he underwent several intricate surgeries. His recovery, though grueling, became a symbol of hope within an otherwise devastating catastrophe. Authorities meticulously preserved the crash site, focusing on retrieving the aircraft's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, both of which were essential to understanding the sequence of events leading to the disaster. Fortunately, these devices were recovered largely intact, enabling investigators from India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation to collaborate with experts from Boeing and the United States National Transportation Safety Board in a highly detailed analysis. This multinational team sought to reconstruct the aircraft's final minutes and decipher the cause of its catastrophic failure. A preliminary review of the flight manifest revealed the presence of passengers from various nationalities, including Indian citizens, British nationals, Portuguese travelers, and Canadians, in addition to 2 infants and a crew composed of Indian flight attendants and pilots. The cockpit was staffed by experienced pilots, Captain Sumit Sabharwal and First Officer Clive Kund, both of whom had extensive hours logged on the Boeing Dreamliner model. The impeccable safety records of the flight crew only deepened the mystery surrounding the crash. As investigations unfolded, DNA identification efforts became both a logistical and emotional ordeal for the families of the victims. The intensity of the crash and the fire had left many remains severely damaged, making identification a prolonged process that lasted several weeks. The Gujarat Forensic Science Department, supported by the Indian Council of Medical Research, coordinated a rapid identification process under immense pressure, eventually succeeding in matching all recovered remains to the flight manifest by June 28th. During this period, the public was inundated with misinformation stemming from an AI-generated fake report that falsely attributed the crash to alleged cockpit miscommunications and fictitious system failures. Experts quickly discredited the report, highlighting its use of terminology borrowed from unrelated incidents, and authorities urged the public to avoid unverified sources, reaffirming their commitment to a transparent, evidence-based investigation. As preliminary findings trickled in, investigators began to focus on a rare dual-engine flameout, which appeared to have occurred moments after takeoff. The aircraft's ram air turbine, a crucial backup system designed to provide emergency power, was reportedly deployed, suggesting an immediate and complete loss of thrust from both engines. This theory gained traction after former pilots and aviation consultants analyzed radar data and cockpit recordings, indicating that even with emergency systems activated, the aircraft could not maintain altitude or return to the airport in time. To test the theory, Air India conducted simulations that replicated the final conditions of the flight. Engineers recreated the aircraft's exact speed and altitude, then introduced simulated engine failures. The results were consistent. The aircraft, under those precise conditions, could not sustain flight. These tests bolstered the hypothesis of a catastrophic dual-engine failure. Investigators also scrutinized fuel quality as a potential contributing factor. They collected samples from the aircraft's fuel tanks and storage facilities at the airport to test for contamination or improper fuel blends, both of which could cause engine engine flameouts. No conclusive evidence of fuel issues was announced publicly, but the meticulousness of the testing process reflected the determination to rule out every possible cause. Boeing simultaneously launched its own internal audit of the Dreamliner's engine and electrical systems in partnership with Rolls-Royce, which manufactures the Trent 1000 engines used on the aircraft. Specialists examined maintenance records, service bulletins, and engine design documents to uncover any latent defects or overlooked issues. As the first fatal accident involving the Dreamliner since its introduction, the crash cast a harsh spotlight on Boeing, already under scrutiny from previous high-profile incidents involving its other aircraft models. In the political arena, India's parliament convened emergency hearings to address civil aviation safety. Lawmakers called for a thorough review of pilot training programs, emergency protocols, and aircraft certification procedures. They also pushed for enhanced oversight of rapidly expanding airline operations within the country to ensure that safety standards remained uncompromised amid commercial growth. Public response was immediate and deeply emotional. Vigils took place across India, with people lighting candles, leaving flowers, and expressing condolences for the victims. The survivors' remarkable tale of endurance became a rallying point for hope, while stories of heroism emerged from the community. One police officer, off duty at the time, helped evacuate students from the burning building, sustaining injuries in the process. Medical students organized blood donation campaigns to aid survivors and rescue teams, demonstrating the community's resilience and compassion in the face of tragedy. Diplomatic responses followed swiftly. Governments from affected nations extended condolences and dispatched consular teams to assist bereaved families with repatriation processes and support services. These actions highlighted the global scope of the disaster, as well as the need for international cooperation in both investigations and victim assistance. Air India's management publicly pledged full transparency and cooperation with investigators, temporarily grounding its remaining 787 Dreamliner fleet as a precaution. The airline's CEO announced compensation packages for victims' families and introduced mental health support services for employees affected by the incident. The International Civil Aviation Organization encouraged member nations to share findings from the investigation to enhance collective knowledge of safety risks. As investigators dug deeper, they also began to examine the possibility of deliberate sabotage. India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau reviewed airport security footage and ordered forensic tests for explosive residues and signs of tampering on the engines and fuel systems. Although no evidence of foul play was confirmed in the initial stages, this line of inquiry underscored the depth and thoroughness of the investigation. At the same time, technical experts re-examined the Dreamliner's complex electrical systems after the cockpit voice recorder revealed a momentary loss of several displays. Analysts investigated whether electrical faults could have cascaded into engine failures. Advanced algorithms were deployed to detect subtle anomalies in flight data, allowing for an unprecedented level of detail in understanding the aircraft's behavior prior to the crash. Simultaneously, legal and financial implications surfaced. Insurance firms began assessing the scale of claims, with early estimates suggesting Air India's liability could surpass $500 million. Law firms in multiple countries initiated class action investigations to determine the possibility of negligence claims against manufacturers or component suppliers. Environmental concerns also emerged in the wake of the crash. Specialists detected traces of jet fuel contamination in the area surrounding the crash site, prompting authorities to initiate soil and water remediation efforts. Hazardous materials such as damaged lithium-ion batteries and chemical fire retardants were carefully removed under strict environmental safety guidelines to prevent long-term ecological damage. International diplomatic channels remained active as nations coordinated the identification and repatriation of victims. Embassies worked closely with Indian authorities to expedite the return of remains and to provide emotional support to grieving families, balancing cultural sensitivities with the urgency of closure. Investigators meticulously synchronized cockpit audio, flight data, and radar information to reconstruct the aircraft's final moments. Experts identified a sudden pitch change and engine sputtering shortly before the Mayday call, adding further evidence to the dual-engine flameout theory. Boeing's internal audit revealed no systemic defect at the time, but the company recommended expanded engine monitoring protocols to prevent similar incidents. In response to the tragedy, India's Civil Aviation Authority issued an interim safety directive mandating specific emergency training drills for pilots operating the 787. These measures were implemented rapidly across major Indian flight training centers to equip pilots with better emergency handling skills for dual-engine failures shortly after takeoff. Calls for regulatory reform gained momentum as opposition leaders demanded greater independence for India's accident investigation bodies, drawing comparisons to the autonomy enjoyed by the NTSB in the United States. Proposals included sharing black box data with international partners immediately and revamping safety oversight mechanisms to improve transparency. As the community's grief persisted, the lone survivor, Vishwas Kumar Romesh, slowly began his recovery, assisted by medical professionals and trauma specialists. His eventual statement to the public called for sweeping improvements in aviation safety in memory of the lives lost in the crash. His story became a symbol of human resilience and an inspiration for continued advocacy. Scholars Scholars began dissecting the incident through academic research, examining human factors, crisis management, and aviation safety protocols. Their analyses aimed to translate lessons from Flight 171 into practical knowledge for future pilots, engineers, and policymakers. Documentarians also began working on projects to preserve the story, combining technical insights with personal narratives to provide a comprehensive portrayal of the disaster. Pilot associations organized emergency forums to discuss the incident and strategize on new training methods to address similar emergencies. Their consensus emphasized empowering pilots with greater autonomy during crises, ensuring faster and more decisive responses in life-threatening situations. Financial markets reacted cautiously, with Boeing's stock temporarily declining after the interim safety directive was issued. Analysts projected higher maintenance costs and stricter regulations for airlines operating the Dreamliner fleet, though confidence in Boeing's cooperative stance tempered long-term investor concerns. As the 90-day deadline for the preliminary report approached, emerging drafts reportedly exonerated the flight crew from fault, instead attributing the accident to an improbable but devastating combination of fuel contamination and electrical issues. The report acknowledged the crew's correct execution of emergency procedures, but highlighted the overwhelming speed of the cascading system failures. In the months following the crash, memorials and tributes were erected in both Ahmedabad and Mumbai to honor the victims, with annual scholarships established in memory of the deceased students. Airlines globally revised their training programs to incorporate scenarios similar to Flight 171, and Boeing committed to convening an industry-wide conference on engine health monitoring. Local communities rallied together to implement grassroots safety measures, with volunteers training in basic disaster response protocols. Students at technical universities took part in innovation challenges, developing technologies aimed at enhancing emergency response capabilities and crash site mapping. Mental health support for those affected by the tragedy remained a priority. Psychologists launched long-term studies on post-traumatic stress and survivor guilt among crash witnesses, while technology-based tools like mobile apps were developed to provide ongoing counseling and community support. Through all of these initiatives, the aviation world affirmed its commitment to ensuring that the tragedy of Flight 171 would not fade into obscurity. Instead, it became a catalyst for enduring change, compelling the global community to confront uncomfortable truths, refine critical systems, and prioritize the sanctity of every life that boards an aircraft. The profound loss, the resilient survivors, and the relentless pursuit of answers all combined to ensure that the lessons from this singular event would echo for decades to come, shaping safer skies for future generations.